with the latest on the corporate front, all the market trends, expert opinion, and sound business advice. It is your unique window into the business world, direct from the heart of China.
Hello and welcome to Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. China has recently announced measures to boost domestic consumption and revive the housing markets as seeking greater economic growth. China's top economic planner, the National Development and Reform Commission, says it will systematically implement various supportive policies to boost the economic growth further. This comes after officials implemented a series of stimulus measures in late September. So what effects can we expect from these stimulus measures? And what's the outlook for China's economy for the rest of the year? For more on this, join us on the line now are Professor Qu Qiang, Fellow of Belt and Road Research Center at Minzu University of China, Chen Jiahe, Chief Investment Officer at Novum Archi Technologies, and also Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University. So, Professor Qu, since the end of September, we are seeing a significant boost in market confidence, not just in housing and equity market, but also in consumption and the overall economy. So what are the key messages sent out by the NDRC or China's top economic planners press conference recently?
Well, we have to understand what's the most important factor of the modern economy. It's not your job. It's not the cash flow. I know it's against your intuition, and even it's not your saving in the bank account. I will tell you that the key factor is the confidence and expectation, because the modern monetary policy issuance and also the modern economy are based on borrowing, the financing of the whole society. So without people's expectation, without people's confidence, people would not borrow. Without borrowing, we will not see the new money issuance coming into the whole industry of the whole, people's livelihood. So confidence is the key in everything. I think currently the Chinese government actually sees this, key factors and try to bring in the confidence again into the whole society. I think number one, just 10 days ago, the Central Bank of China has, issued a bunch of the policies towards the financial market to guarantee that we're going to have ample liquidities. We're going to have very favorable financial and monetary environment towards the financial market. We made it very clear we're going to support the property market as well as the stock market. So this is one. And secondly, I think the central leadership has mentioned we're going to have a combo of the policies towards, the government, the central government, local government, as well as for the enterprises and etc. And I think NDRC's meeting just 2 days ago has made it very clear in details to show that we're going to help the central government to carry out the key project. We're going to help them to carry out an innovation to support the major infrastructure and also the enterprise project in the future, as well as for the local government, everybody concerning about the local borrowing, local bond, and the NDRC mentioned very clearly we have the fundings on the way to support the local government to solve their issues. And also they mentioned they're going to help the property market. They're going to help the vulnerable groups like disabled families, like, family with senior citizens with children, give them the coupons and more of the financial support. So I think this is a rather thorough package of the augment policies to help every aspect of the society. It mentioned clearly how we're going to support the foundation, to make sure the floor or bottom line of the society would not drop, as well as to point it out the future direction or the ceiling we're going to be elevated in the future. So with this combo, we're bringing back the confidence, and that is the key, that we see the stock market is back, property market is back, and also consumption is back during the national holidays.
China stressed the need to strengthen the counter-cyclical adjustment to fiscal and monetary policies. As Professor Qu Qiang mentioned, we've seen the latest package of stimulus measures, including the cutting of the reserve requirement ratio and lowering the mortgage rates on existing home loans. So how effective are these steps in stabilizing the economy?
Right. So I think if we only look at the monetary easing in isolation, I don't think we're going to get the full picture of how important this package of stimulus has been very effective. Cutting RR or cutting interest rates, these are traditional monetary policy. But when the economy is in a low confidence, and also when households and businesses are deleveraging, it's very difficult to get that demand for the borrowing up. So that policy coupled with other policies, as Professor Chu talked about earlier, I would just add, there are policies that specifically, like you mentioned, targeted at the equity market, setting up the relending and also the swaps lines for companies and also for financial institutions to invest directly. And that has been really effective in boosting confidence and helping the stock market. As we see, the rally in the last week has been really really positive, right? 20% upside. So I think all of these show that, these policies are very targeted and it's helpful. On the other hand, I think the other policy that really the focus is really to strengthening or stabilize rather the housing market. And again, that has to do with not only lowering the mortgage rates, but also easing a lot of housing purchase restrictions in some of the major cities like Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and Shanghai. And early data have indicated that these policies have been really effective. When you look at the number, October 1st to 5th, the transaction amounts of the floor areas in Shanghai has gone up by 44% year over year. Beijing, 30% jump. And Guangzhou, again, the floor sales have gone up by 44% between September 30 and the October 4th compared, again, a year ago. So I think these policies are very important. What I think will still forthcoming, I believe, is fiscal policy. And I think that's very important, not only as a counter-cyclical policy, but would also allow to address some of the structural issues. For example, the local government debt, as Professor Chu mentioned. So yes, setting up the central government support line to allow the local governments to resolve their debt problems and continue to support the local economy and implement, public policies and so on and so forth. Those are very important, not only for the short-term growth, but really for the long-term structural transformation of the economy.
So Jiahe, so as Ian mentioned, we have seen, robust travel and spending during the National Day holiday. The transport authorities say more than 2 billion domestic trips were made during the 7-day holiday. So what are the trends that you have observed in consumer spending, travel data during this year's National Day holiday? And more importantly, how do they reflect China's broader economic conditions?
Well, when we look at this national holiday, we have seen the consumption has actually been growing quite much, especially when we talk the offline consumption, because when we look at the online consumption, it has always been growing in China. But when we look at the offline consumption, it's picking up very quickly in this year. And during the national holiday, we have saw that. We see a lot of people traveling around. Data from the transportation department said the traveling has been rising about 6% compared with last year. And we have seen a lot of people going to visit other places in China and from outside of China, because we have saw that China give out a lot of visa-free policies to many countries around the world nowadays. So we have seen that there has been, I think the data was about 30 or 40% increase of foreigners coming in to visit and consume in China that came through the visa-free policy scheme. So, it's much easier nowadays to come and visit China. So we see all these consumption items are actually picking up. People buy much more things. And one other point that we have to remember is that the property market started to be really vivid during this national holiday, that, more people are going out to look for the properties. The trading volume has increased very dramatically, basically because the central bank and the government has been giving out a lot of policies, such as reduction of down payment ratio, reduction of mortgage rates, all these kind of things. And when people buy properties, they don't just buy a concrete box. What they do is that they buy property, they buy a flat or house. They will buy a lot of things. I mean, furniture, TV sets, air conditioner, even a new car. So this kind of increase with the property trading volume it has been, and it will be helping the China's consumption a lot in the coming few months. Yeah, you will see people consume much more things.
So, Professor Chu, talking about the property market, we know that recently some specific policies have been implemented in many of Chinese cities to stabilize and even invigorate the property market. So how effective have those measures been in restoring the market confidence?
Well, I think in a short term, everybody can see very clearly. I think the effect is quite obvious. The stock market very, warmly heading towards the potential, policy packages towards more of the stimulus policies. So, and also we've been looking at the consumption market during the national holidays, because before the national holiday, I think the property market and the stock market has been giving people very good feedback. So during the national holidays, many people upgraded their, tourism plan. We've been seeing there are more than 700 million people traveling around. This is basically like half of the population during the whole China are traveling around, to try to have fun, enjoy themselves during the holiday. And the spending is also very phenomenal. It's a very large number of spending compared to the same period of the several years ago, and also compared to people's expectations, beyond people's expectation for sure. As well as for the property market, property market just 10 days ago are described as a still water. But now if you go to Shenzhen, you go Shanghai, Beijing, you will find what we call the day clear property projects are back again. The newly developed property project has been sold out just within one day, and the turnovers can be like billions of Chinese yuan. So I think people are looking into this market with a changed mindset. They've been thinking, okay, this is actually within the control, and also the resilience of Chinese market and the size of the Chinese market will guarantee the floor of the whole economy, and also the direction and the future can also be very clear. So I think that will affect not only in the short term for now, but also I think the effect will be revealed in a rather longer period of time. You're just gonna wait and see.
So actually talking about China's consumption, how to cultivate the new consumption models and supporting the elderly care and child care industries, and how will all this help China's economic growth in the long run?
Right. So I think what you mentioned is the service consumption. So what we have seen the trend is that even though because of this, property market has been in, sort of downward trend for a while, people's purchases of goods like household appliances, as Jiahe mentioned earlier, has been going down or relatively soft in the past few years. But the service consumption has been very strong. When you look at the numbers, the service consumption is always growing at a much faster rate than the overall retail sales of goods consumption increase. So I think people are willing to pay for experiences, for services, including elderly care and also childcare. So I think this is very important when it comes to boosting domestic private sector consumption demand. We need to cultivate and continue to stimulate and promote service consumption. And that is not only important for the consumption side on the demand side, but it's also very important when it comes to supply side, because service sector is usually the large sector that employed a lot of workers. And so I think, promoting service sector really makes sense from both the demand side and supply side. And particularly in the sector that you mentioned, as we know, China has been undergoing, the low fertility rates and also population aging. So we wanted to promote those sectors, not only to really boost people's living standards, but also really trying to boost or help people to ease the mind, right, when it comes to childbirth and childbearing and child rearing. If we could put down these public facilities to improve, childcare facilities and elderly care, then I think people would have a lot more incentives when it comes to, giving birth to children and to raise them. Also, the silver economy, it's a great potential for China's consumption market. So I think this is very important to think about how we can use, very comprehensive policies to boost the service sector, to boost the consumption of the sector, the investment of the sector, and also, all kinds of support policies. So I think these are very important, for the economy at the short term, but also in the long term.
So Jiahe, we talk about the consumption, we talk about the property market. So how do you view the recent performance of China's stock market? And what about the views of the foreign capital on the series of moves recently made by China?
Well, that's a very right person that you're asking about me. That I'm staying in this market all day. It's been really, really exciting these days. The market went upward by 25% in just a few trading days. And when we look at the trading value, it has been increased dramatically in China's capital market. I think the latest figure just passed 3 trillion RMB trading value for one single trading day. So Well, what this tells us is that, first of all, investors are really exciting. I mean, in a bull market, you never see the market keeps on going upward forever. It will come down sometimes, but what you can see is that the sentiment of investors are picked back, and this is exactly what's happening right now. I mean, people are jumping in, and the stock market is taking up the headline of all the medias that you can ever see. So everyone is talking about the stock market, and people started to digging for investment opportunities in it. So that's the first thing, and this will support the capital market to be more bullish in the future, because you get more people interested about this market, then you get the money coming in, then you get the market goes upward. And when you talk about the foreign capital, the thing is that because the China's capital market, especially the stock market, hasn't been given a lot of investment return in the past few years, so many foreign capital are just standing there and wait and see. They don't know what's going on. I think they're looking for what we call a wealth effect. That means if you see some people are getting money in a market, and you start to be much more interesting with this market. And when the market rises up, people would talk about them in the media, on the website, on internet, on social media, everywhere around the world. And people start to look at this market. And this is exactly what's happening with China right now, that if you look at the global media news, and people are starting to talk about China. Is there opportunities? Should we go there? And a lot of capital are rushing out of markets like Japan or India, and they're coming to look at China again. So basically speaking, this will be a pretty much support for China's market in the future.
So do you think the international investors will come to China or this market in following days? And if so, which sectors will they focus on?
Yeah, they're definitely looking at China's market, and they're coming in. They're trying to find the right companies. Because, in the world today, what we can see is that the Fed is starting to reduce the interest rate. So that means the fixed asset investment in the United States is starting to lose its competitiveness in the global capital market. So you have to find somewhere to put your money. And China, as the capital market is rising up right now from a very bottom, with a very low valuation, and you see a large and promising economy. So you definitely want to rush in. And the question left, as you asked, is that which sector and which companies are they going to pick? Well, I think basically they are looking for any sector, because when you talk about global investors, they're coming from different backgrounds. Some come from the money of the financial industry, some might come from energy industry, some from consumption industry, and some from all this kind of money. And people get different experience with understanding different companies. So they will come over to China and look at the companies that is familiar with these investors. For example, if your money is coming from Middle East, you might get more interested with energy and oil companies in China, because you know the oil market much better. But if your money comes from Wall Street, you might get more interesting with the financial companies in China. So basically, they're looking at every company, I think.
So, Professor Chu, so the new measures play, particular emphasis on improving public welfare, targeting some key groups such as the recent college graduates, the rural migrant workers, and also low-income families. So, how do you think these demand-side policies will complement the earlier supply-side measures?
Well, I think this is actually a brilliant idea. According to our statistics, there probably are 600 million of normal people. Their monthly income is below 1,000 yuan. If we can help those people, especially the vulnerable group among them, I think with very limited spending, we can actually alleviate a very large proportion of social consumptions. Because if you give them just like 1,000 yuan, they would rather to buy the daily groceries, all kinds of the necessary products that they will use in the daily life, than putting them in the banking account or saving account. So I think this is actually very, very important. And also beyond the economic gain, another important purpose for that is for the social stabilities. So I think this time at the NDRC meeting, they mentioned very clearly for the family with disabled citizen, senior citizen, with many children, with low-income people, people between jobs. We're going to provide them the trainings, the coupons. We're give them the uplifted, the minimum allowance subsidy, and all of these will actually help them to carry out more of the consumption behaviors in the future, and they are actually become a very important force to improve what we call the micro circulation of the money of the economy, and then we're going to see the effect actually be taken effective in probably 3 months or 6 months. This is not just a guess. This is an experience in Europe, in America, in Japan and Malaysia. And after 3 months of issuing the minimum allowance or more of the subsidy to the vulnerable people, 3 months later or 6 months later, the whole economy, especially for the real economy and consumption, will be improved for sure. So I think this is actually a very smart move.
So do you agree with Professor Qu Qiang on this?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's important when we think about, stimulating consumer demand. I don't think, the very untargeted programs like in the United States, it's actually a good one because I think, for one, it could create a lot of inflationary pressure. And for two, I think, when the policies are not targeted, they usually have very little effectiveness. And I think for China, as Professor Qu mentioned, it has huge economic impacts in the sense that, these low-income families are the ones that really need the extra cash boost. And they are likely the ones that would spend the money instead of hoarding the money and save it in the bank. So I think that's important from a consumption stimulus point of view. But I think also it has much broader social implications. For one, I think it's important to signal to society that, if you are experiencing economic hardships, the government is behind you, right? So I think this is important to boost the confidence. And on the other hand, this common, prosperity, even though we haven't really talked about that a lot, I think it's still at the back of the policymakers' mind. And I think that's very important. And I think that shows really the Chinese economy's strengths, right? Which is no one is, left behind. And it's important to stabilize and provide the kinds of economic and social stability and prosperity to the families. So I agree that NDRC policy, I think, the implications are actually much broader if you really look at the policy intention in the middle of all these different other policy supports. It's not to be viewed in isolation, but really to see it as a way to double down on these stimulus measures, but also really in a way premeditated and targeted policies to really help the economic sector that really in need of help.
So Jiahe, so in terms of employment, China actually emphasized the importance of supporting key employment groups such as recent graduates and migrant workers. So what do you think are the challenges and opportunities here? And how can China balance the job creation with economic growth, especially with this emphasis on innovation and high-tech industry?
I mean, that's a very good question. You don't just want economic growth without getting people employed. I mean, fulfill your factories with robots and people get no money. That's really wrong. And when we look at the economy these years, China is currently facing a slight pressure coming from the employment sector, basically because we are having a hardship with the property market. The property has been started its adjustment since about 3 or 4 years ago. And if you look at the global economic history, which I studied the economic history as my major when I was in Oxford history faculty about 20 years ago, is that if you look at the past 200 years, you never see one single country's economy keep on growing at a very high speed when its property market is going into trouble. So that's the thing that China is currently facing. We've got a property market that we have to handle. So we see these problems coming up with the employment. But if you look at the unemployment ratio currently, it's still, I think it's slightly above 5% in China. So that's not too high a figure. And we try to reduce that down. And government has been doing a lot of things to help them. For example, if you look at the policies that have been set out to help the university graduates to find their jobs, a lot of policies have been set out to help them. So it's many things that China is trying to do. And when you talk about the high tech, we have to understand this from different aspects. The first is that high tech sometimes reduces some kind of the employment. For example, when we use more machinery in the factory, we use more auto driving, we reduce some traditional jobs. But the other side is that the high tech itself will increase the economic growth of a country and make sure everyone, as a whole, people are richer than before, and the country will have more money to to spread to anyone. So if you look at the history in the past 200, 300 years, ever since the Industrial Revolution, we created many machines and new robots and things to replace a lot of old jobs. I mean, if you look at the jobs that we are doing today, it's very different from 2 centuries ago. We don't wash our own clothes, we don't do this, we don't do that. But people's lives are getting better. So if you think about this, high tech is, take every account together, is that high tech is good for the employment.
So Professor Chu, so what do you think is the outlook for China's economy for the rest of the year, particularly with the recent package of stimulus measures?
Well, I think the stimulus package and the augment combos will definitely create positive feedback towards the whole economy. I do think the 5% of the GDP growth target can be achieved. And I think we should not only talk about the short term. I think the long term is actually a sustainable development. This is actually what the government and also people are paying attention to. So I think we should take this opportunity of this year's stimulus package to refine our economic structure and also to have a better understanding about the future directions of our economy, and then to form a synergy, try to use the current financial resources and also the opportunity to shift the gears so that I think the whole nation can climb up to a higher ground of the economic structures to seize the commanding height in a value chain. And that we can make sure that Chinese economy will stably stand on a higher income level. And that is what we want to see. And also that is what people and the government want for the next 3 or 5 years.
And thank you very much. That was Professor Qu Qiang, Fellow of Belt and Road Research Center at Minzu University of China, Chen Jiahe, Chief Investment Officer at Novum Archi Technologies, and also Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University. And that's all the time we have for this edition of Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening.